When Sarah walked into Davidson's auto shop asking for a job, the laughter was deafening. Women can't fix real engines, Frank sneered. But when she accepted his impossible challenge, that laughter would freeze forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor of Davidson's auto repair as Sarah Mitchell pushed open the heavy glass door. The smell of motor oil and steel filled her nostrils, a scent that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the years. She clutched her resume tightly, her palms slightly damp despite the confidence she'd built through countless hours perfecting her craft. The shop buzzed with activity. Hydraulic lifts hissed as they raised vehicles into the air, while the rhythmic clanging of wrenches against metal created an industrial symphony. Sarah's eyes swept across the workspace, taking in the organized chaos of a busy repair facility. This was exactly where she belonged. "Can I help you, miss?" The voice belonged to a tall man emerging from beneath the hood of a luxury sedan. Mike Torres wiped his hands on a shop towel, his expression neutral, but curious. "Are you here to pick up a vehicle?" "Actually, I'm here about the mechanic position," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the sudden attention from several workers who had paused their tasks to listen. "I'd like to speak with the manager." A chorus of chuckles rippled through the workshop. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her composure. She'd faced this reaction before, though it never got easier. "Frank," Mike called toward the back office. "Someone here about the job." Frank Davidson emerged from his office like a king surveying his domain. His expensive button-down shirt and perfectly styled hair seemed oddly out of place among the grease-stained uniforms surrounding him. He'd inherited this shop from his father and had spent years building it into the most successful auto repair business in the county. His eyes landed on Sarah, and his expression shifted from curiosity to amusement. "You're here about the mechanic position?" he asked, barely suppressing a smirk. "Yes, sir. I have 5 years of experience and—" "5 years?" Frank interrupted, his voice rising loud enough for the entire shop to hear. "Doing what exactly? Changing air fresheners?" The laughter was immediate and cutting. Sarah felt every pair of eyes in the shop focused on her, but she refused to back down. "I've worked on everything from basic maintenance to complete engine rebuilds. I have my ASE certifications and—" "ASE certifications," Frank repeated mockingly, turning to address his employees as if Sarah were part of some elaborate joke. "Did you hear that, boys? She has certificates." The workshop erupted in laughter again. Sarah noticed some of the younger mechanics looking uncomfortable, but none dared challenge their boss's behavior. "Listen, sweetheart," Frank continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "This isn't a place for delicate hands. We work on real engines here. Engines that require actual strength and knowledge that can't be learned from some weekend course." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Maybe you'd like to test that knowledge instead of making assumptions." The laughter died instantly. Frank's eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge. The entire shop fell silent except for the distant hum of an air compressor. "Test your knowledge?" Frank repeated slowly, a dangerous glint entering his eyes. "That's interesting. Very interesting indeed." Mike Torres stepped forward slightly, sensing the tension escalating beyond playful harassment. "Frank, maybe we should just—" No, Frank waved him off, his mind clearly working on something. "Our guest here wants to prove herself. Who am I to deny such enthusiasm?" He began walking toward the far corner of the shop, where a sleek sports car sat under a tarp. With theatrical flair, he pulled away the covering to reveal a pristine racing vehicle that looked like it belonged on a professional track rather than in a small-town repair shop. "This beauty came in 3 days ago," Frank announced, patting the car's roof. "The owner claims it's making a strange noise during acceleration, but here's the thing. We can't find anything wrong with it." "Runs perfect every time we test it." Sarah approached the vehicle, her trained eye immediately noting several details that others might miss. The car was immaculate, clearly well-maintained and expensive. "My best mechanics have spent hours on this machine," Frank continued, his voice growing more animated as he sensed an opportunity for public humiliation. "Mike here has 30 years of experience. Tommy graduated top of his class from technical school, even brought in a specialist from the dealership. The shop had completely stopped working now. Every employee gathered around, forming a loose circle around Sarah and the mysterious sports car. "So here's my proposition," Frank said, crossing his arms with supreme confidence. If you can diagnose and fix whatever problem this car has, assuming there even is one, I'll not only give you the job, I'll make you head mechanic with a salary that matches. Sarah felt her heart racing. This wasn't just about employment anymore. It was about proving that talent wasn't determined by gender or appearance. And if I can't? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Frank's smile turned predatory. Then you leave here and never apply to another serious auto shop in this county again. Word travels fast in this business, and I have friends everywhere. The stakes couldn't be higher. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, some eager for entertainment, others uncomfortable with the spectacle, all waiting for her response. Mike Torres caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, clearly trying to warn her away from what seemed like an impossible situation. But Sarah had faced impossible situations before. She'd grown up in a world that constantly told her she didn't belong, that she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or tough enough. Every accomplishment in her career had come despite similar challenges. I accept, she said quietly, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. Frank's grin widened. Excellent. You have until closing time. That's 8 hours to do what my entire team couldn't accomplish in 3 days. As Frank walked away, already savoring what he assumed would be an easy victory, Sarah remained by the car. She placed her hand on the hood, feeling the slight warmth from the recently cooled engine. What none of them knew was that Sarah had encountered this exact model before, under circumstances that would shock everyone present. But that revelation would have to wait. For now, she had 8 hours to prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everybody underestimates. The workshop fell into an eerie quiet as Frank's footsteps echoed toward his office. Sarah stood alone beside the mysterious sports car, acutely aware of 20 pairs of eyes studying her every move. The weight of the challenge pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force, but she'd learned long ago that pressure either crushes you or transforms you into something stronger. You sure about this? Mike Torres approached cautiously, his voice low enough that the other mechanics couldn't hear. Frank wasn't kidding about his connections. He really can make things difficult for you in this industry. Sarah nodded without taking her eyes off the vehicle. I appreciate the warning, but I didn't come this far to back down now. Mike studied her face, searching for signs of doubt or fear. Instead, he found something that surprised him. Calm determination that reminded him of master mechanics he'd known who could diagnose problems others couldn't even detect. What's your plan? He asked. First, I need to understand what you've already tried, Sarah replied, pulling her hair back and rolling up her sleeves. Can you walk me through everything? Mike glanced around the shop, noting that most of the workers had returned to their tasks, but were clearly listening. We've run every diagnostic test in the book, checked the engine management system, fuel delivery, exhaust flow, transmission coupling, even pulled the engine apart looking for internal damage. And the symptoms? That's the frustrating part, Mike admitted. The owner insists there's a vibration during hard acceleration, around 4,000 RPM. But every time we test it, everything runs smooth as silk. Sarah circled the car slowly, her trained eye cataloging details that others might overlook. The paint gleamed without a single scratch, the tires showed minimal wear, and the interior was pristine. This wasn't just an expensive car. It was someone's pride and joy. Has anyone considered that the problem might not be mechanical? She asked. From across the shop, Tommy Morrison called out, What else could it be? Magic? The comment drew scattered laughter, but Sarah ignored the mockery. She'd heard worse throughout her career, and had learned that the best response was simply proving them wrong. Sometimes the most complex problems have surprisingly simple solutions, she said, opening the hood with practiced ease. The engine bay was immaculate, every component perfectly positioned and maintained. Sarah leaned in closer, not to examine the mechanical parts, but to study the subtle signs that told the real story of this vehicle's history. Minutes passed in focused silence. Sarah's hands moved methodically through the engine compartment, not touching or adjusting anything, simply observing with the intensity of a detective at a crime scene. See anything the rest of us missed? Frank's voice boomed from behind her. He'd returned from his office, clearly expecting to find her already defeated by the complexity of the challenge. Actually, yes, Sarah replied without turning around. This car has been modified. The workshop erupted in scoffs and dismissive comments. Tommy shook his head dramatically. Lady, we've been over every inch of that engine. There are no modifications. Not the engine, Sarah said calmly. The suspension. Mike stepped closer, his curiosity overriding his skepticism. What kind of modifications? Sarah pointed to specific areas beneath the hood, her explanations precise and technical. The front strut mounting points show stress patterns consistent with aftermarket performance upgrades. The sway bar bushings are racing grade, not factory standard. Someone has systematically upgraded this car's handling characteristics. Frank crossed his arms, his confidence wavering slightly. Even if that's true, how does that explain the vibration problem? Because whoever installed these modifications didn't account for the harmonic frequency changes, Sarah explained, her voice gaining strength as she moved into familiar technical territory. Performance suspension creates different resonance patterns throughout the chassis. At specific RPM ranges, these modifications can amplify vibrations that would normally be dampened by factory components. The shop had gone completely silent. Sarah's explanation wasn't just plausible, it demonstrated a level of technical understanding that impressed even the most experienced mechanics present. That's quite a theory, Frank said slowly, though his mocking tone had noticeably diminished. But theories don't fix cars. Can you prove it? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the shop. Give me access to your diagnostic computer and 30 minutes. Frank hesitated. Allowing her to use the shop's expensive diagnostic equipment would legitimize her challenge in front of his employees. But backing down now would make him look weak. Fine, he agreed reluctantly. 30 minutes. But when this doesn't work, I want you out of here immediately. Mike wheeled over the diagnostic cart, its screen displaying complex readouts that would overwhelm most casual observers. Sarah's fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising fluency, navigating through menu systems like someone who'd used similar equipment countless times. What exactly are you looking for? Mike asked, genuinely curious despite his initial skepticism. Frequency analysis during acceleration simulation, Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the cascading data streams. If I'm right, we'll see harmonic spikes at specific RPM ranges that correlate with the customer's complaints. The computer hummed quietly as it processed thousands of data points. Sarah made subtle adjustments to the testing parameters, fine-tuning the analysis with expertise that made Mike reconsider his initial assessment of her abilities. Then, suddenly, she stopped typing. On the screen, a clear pattern emerged. Frequency spikes that lined up exactly with the RPM range where the customer reported problems. There, Sarah said quietly, pointing to the display. Harmonic resonance at 4,200 RPM, caused by the interaction between the modified suspension components and the chassis design. Mike leaned in closer, studying the data with growing amazement. In 30 years of automotive repair, he'd never seen someone identify such a subtle problem so quickly. How did you know to look for that? He asked. Sarah paused, realizing that her answer would reveal more about her background than she'd initially intended to share. The shop fell silent again, everyone waiting for her response. Because I've seen this exact problem before, she said finally, on a race car that cost more than most people's houses. Frank stepped forward, his expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching concern. What kind of race car? Sarah met his gaze directly, knowing that her next words would change everything. The kind that competes in professional racing circuits. The kind where small problems can mean the difference between winning and crashing at 200 miles per hour. The revelation hit the workshop like a shockwave. Sarah wasn't just some amateur mechanic looking for work. She was someone with experience in the highest levels of automotive performance. But before anyone could process the full implications of what she'd just revealed, Frank's phone rang. The caller ID made his face pale instantly. "It's the car's owner," he announced, his voice tight with sudden anxiety. "He's coming to pick up his car in 2 hours, and he expects it to be fixed." The stakes had just escalated dramatically. It was no longer just about proving Sarah's abilities. It was about the shop's reputation with what was clearly an important customer. "Can you actually fix it?" Frank asked, and for the first time since Sarah had entered the shop, his voice carried no mockery, only desperate hope. Sarah looked at the car, then at the diagnostic data, then at the faces surrounding her. She knew the solution, but implementing it would require resources, time, and most importantly, the cooperation of people who had spent the morning treating her like an unwelcome intruder. "Yes," she said simply, "but I'll need help." The silence that followed Sarah's request for help was deafening. Frank stared at his phone, the caller ID still glowing with the name that made his palms sweat. Marcus Wellington III. The Wellington name carried weight in this town. Old money, political connections, and the kind of influence that could make or break a business with a single phone call. 2 hours, Frank muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Marcus Wellington gives us 2 hours to fix what we couldn't solve in 3 days, or... He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. Losing the Wellington account wouldn't just mean losing one customer. It would signal to the entire upper-class community that Davidson's Auto Repair couldn't handle their most prestigious vehicles. Sarah watched Frank's internal struggle with growing urgency. "What kind of help do you need?" Mike asked, stepping forward despite the skeptical glances from his colleagues. "I need someone who understands fabrication work," Sarah explained, moving toward the car's undercarriage. "The fix isn't just about identifying the problem. It requires custom dampeners to counteract the harmonic frequencies. And I need access to your machine shop." Tommy Morrison laughed nervously. "Lady, our machine shop isn't some hobby garage. That equipment costs more than most people make in a year." "Then it should be precise enough to manufacture the dampening components we need," Sarah replied coolly, already sketching calculations on a piece of paper she'd found. Her pencil moved rapidly across the surface, creating technical drawings that demonstrated an understanding of physics and engineering that left the watching mechanics speechless. Frank approached cautiously, studying the complex diagrams over her shoulder. The calculations were beyond anything he'd seen outside of engineering textbooks, yet Sarah was producing them as naturally as someone writing a grocery list. "Where exactly did you learn to do this?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of suspicion and growing respect. Sarah paused her sketching, realizing that partial truths would no longer suffice. The shop fell silent as she prepared to reveal the background she'd been carefully concealing. "Silverstone Racing Development," she said quietly. "I spent 3 years as their lead suspension engineer before moving to trackside technical support." The name hit the automotive enthusiasts in the shop like a thunderbolt. Silverstone Racing Development wasn't just any racing team. They were legendary in motorsport circles, known for revolutionary engineering that had dominated professional circuits for over a decade. Mike's wrench clattered to the floor. "You worked for Silverstone? The same Silverstone that built the cars that won the International Racing Championship 3 years running?" "I didn't just work for them," Sarah corrected, her voice gaining strength as she decided to reveal the full truth. "I designed the suspension systems that helped win those championships." The revelation created a ripple effect through the workshop. Tommy's skeptical expression crumbled into amazement. Other mechanics stopped pretending to work and gathered closer, suddenly seeing Sarah in an entirely different light. Frank felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He'd spent the morning humiliating someone whose engineering expertise far exceeded anything in his shop. Worse, he'd done it in front of his entire staff, who were now witnessing his massive error in judgment. "If you're so accomplished," Frank said, his voice strained with desperation to maintain some authority, "why are you here looking for work at a small-town repair shop?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, but Sarah had expected it. She'd been asked variations of it at every job interview since leaving the racing world. "Because racing is a young person's game with politics that don't always reward the best talent," she answered honestly. "When team ownership changes, loyalties shift. Engineers who built championship-winning cars can find themselves suddenly unemployed when new management wants to bring in their own people." Her explanation carried the weight of painful experience. Mike recognized the tone. He'd seen talented mechanics sidelined by factors beyond their control throughout his career. "But that's racing's loss and our potential gain," Mike said firmly, surprising everyone, including himself, with his public support. "If she can fix this Wellington car, Frank, we're looking at someone who could transform this entire operation." Frank's phone buzzed with a text message that made his face pale further. "Wellington just texted. He's moved up his arrival time. We have 90 minutes. The shortened timeline sent shockwaves through the group. What had seemed like a challenging but manageable deadline had suddenly become nearly impossible. "Can the repairs actually be completed in 90 minutes? Frank asked Sarah directly, abandoning all pretense of superiority. Sarah studied her calculations again, her mind racing through the complex logistics of custom fabrication. If I have full access to your machine shop and 2 people who can follow precise instructions, yes, but there's no margin for error. You'll have whatever you need, Frank said immediately, then turned to his staff. Mike, I want you working directly with Sarah. Tommy, clear the machine shop and prepare the fabrication equipment. The transformation in Frank's attitude was dramatic, but Sarah understood the motivation. He wasn't suddenly respecting her abilities. He was desperately trying to save his business reputation. There's something else you should know, Sarah added, as the team prepared to move into action. The Wellington car isn't just any modified vehicle. Based on the specific suspension components I identified, this car was professionally prepared for track use. Someone invested serious money in making it a high-performance machine. Mike raised an eyebrow. How serious are we talking? The modifications I've seen suggest someone spent at least $50,000 on performance upgrades alone, Sarah replied. This isn't a weekend hobbyist project. It's a professional-grade racing preparation. The implications were staggering. Marcus Wellington wasn't just a wealthy car enthusiast. He was someone serious enough about performance to invest in racing-level modifications. Which means, Frank said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice, if we can't fix this properly, we're not just losing a customer. We're proving to someone with deep connections in the performance car world that we're not capable of handling serious automotive engineering. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. But if we succeed, word will spread through racing circles that Davidson's Auto Repair has someone who understands high-performance vehicles at the deepest technical level. The stakes had escalated beyond anyone's initial understanding. This wasn't just about fixing one car or proving one person's abilities. It was about establishing the shop's reputation in an entirely new market segment worth millions of dollars annually. Frank looked around at his staff, seeing uncertainty and excitement in equal measure. Then his gaze settled on Sarah, who stood calmly amid the chaos, ready to lead a repair operation that would either elevate his business to unprecedented heights or destroy everything he'd built. "What do you need us to do?" he asked, and for the first time since Sarah had entered the shop. His question carried genuine respect rather than condescension. Sarah smiled, rolling up her sleeves as she prepared to prove that talent, knowledge, and determination could overcome any preconception. "Follow my lead," she said simply, "and prepare to learn something you've never seen before." The machine shop at Davidson's Auto Repair had never seen activity like this. Sarah moved through the space with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony, her hands dancing across equipment that most mechanics only used for basic repairs. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, born from years of working under pressure where milliseconds determined victory or devastating failure. "I need the aluminum stock cut to these exact specifications," Sarah instructed Mike, handing him a detailed drawing that looked more like aerospace engineering than automotive repair. "The tolerances can't vary by more than 0.02 of an inch, or the harmonic dampening won't work." Mike studied the specifications with growing amazement. The precision required was beyond anything he'd encountered in 30 years of automotive work. "Sarah, this level of accuracy, we're talking about tolerances tighter than most factory specifications. Racing components operate in a different world," Sarah replied, already setting up the CNC machine with programming that revealed her deep understanding of advanced manufacturing. When cars travel at speeds where a small vibration can cause catastrophic failure, precision isn't optional, it's survival. Tommy watched from across the shop, his earlier skepticism replaced by fascination. "I've never seen anyone program that machine so quickly," he admitted to another mechanic. "She's making it look easy." Frank paced nervously near the entrance, checking his phone every few minutes. The weight of the Wellington account pressed down on him like a physical force. Marcus Wellington's influence extended beyond automotive circles into real estate, local politics, and business networks that could make or break smaller companies. "How are we doing on time?" Frank called out, his voice tight with anxiety. 73 minutes remaining," Sarah answered without looking up from her work. "The dampening components will take 45 minutes to fabricate, leaving us 28 minutes for installation and testing." The timeline was impossibly tight, but Sarah's calm confidence began spreading through the team. Mike found himself working with a focus he hadn't experienced in years, inspired by Sarah's unwavering determination and technical excellence. "Mike, I need you to prepare the vehicle for component installation," Sarah continued, her hands never pausing in their work. "Remove the front suspension struts and create access to the mounting points. Use the torque specifications I've written on that board. They're different from standard procedures." As Mike moved to execute her instructions, Sarah began operating the precision lathe with expertise that left the watching mechanics speechless. The machine hummed under her control, shaping raw aluminum into components with tolerances that rivaled aerospace manufacturing. "Where did you learn to operate equipment like this?" Tommy asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "Silverstone had their own fabrication facility," Sarah explained while monitoring the machine's progress. "When you're developing new suspension technologies for racing, you can't wait for outside vendors. We had to be able to prototype and manufacture components in-house, often within hours of conception." The revelation added another layer to Sarah's already impressive background. She wasn't just an engineer or mechanic. She was someone who understood the entire manufacturing process from design through production. Frank's phone rang, and the caller ID made his stomach drop. "It's Wellington," he announced, his voice barely concealing panic. "He's calling for an update." "Don't answer," Sarah said firmly, surprising everyone with her directness. "If you answer now, you'll either have to lie about our progress or admit we're not finished. Neither option helps us." Frank stared at his phone, torn between his instinct to appease an important customer and Sarah's logical advice. The phone stopped ringing, but the missed call notification felt like a countdown timer. "He's going to be angry that I didn't answer," Frank said anxiously. "He'll be angrier if you answer and can't give him good news," Sarah replied, removing the first completed component from the lathe. The piece gleamed under the shop lights, its surface finish and dimensional accuracy rivaling factory-manufactured parts. Mike looked up from his work on the vehicle, sweat beading on his forehead despite the shop's air conditioning. "Sarah, I've never seen suspension modifications like these. The engineering is incredible, but the installation complexity is exactly why the vibration problem occurred in the first place," Sarah finished. "Whoever installed these components originally was skilled but didn't account for the harmonic interactions. They focused on performance gains without considering frequency management." She held up the custom dampening component she'd just fabricated, explaining its function with the passion of someone who truly understood the physics involved. "This piece will absorb the specific frequencies that create the vibration while allowing the performance benefits to remain intact." Tommy shook his head in amazement. "In 20 years of working on cars, I've never seen anyone design and manufacture a custom solution this quickly. Racing taught me that problems don't wait for convenient timing," Sarah said, moving to the second lathe to begin fabricating the companion component. "When something fails during a race weekend, you have hours, not days, to engineer a solution." The second component took shape under Sarah's expert guidance, her movements fluid and confident despite the enormous pressure. Frank watched in fascination as someone he'd dismissed as unqualified demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything he'd imagined possible. 52 minutes remaining, Mike called out, his voice carrying new urgency as the deadline approached. Sarah nodded, completing the final cuts on the second dampening component. "Perfect timing. Mike, are the mounting points prepared?" "Ready for installation," Mike confirmed, having followed Sarah's precise instructions with growing confidence in her expertise. The next phase required both technical skill and physical coordination. Sarah and Mike worked in tandem, installing the custom components with precision that bordered on surgical. Every bolt was torqued to exact specifications, every alignment checked multiple times. Frank's phone buzzed with a text message that made his face pale. "Wellington is 15 minutes away. He moved up his schedule again." The announcement sent shockwaves through the team. Their already impossible timeline had just become nearly miraculous. "We can do this," Sarah said calmly, though sweat now glistened on her forehead. "Mike, start the engine while I make the final adjustments." The engine roared to life, its sound filling the shop with mechanical symphony. But more importantly, the characteristic smoothness that everyone recognized was immediately apparent. "Take it to 4,000 RPM, Sarah instructed, monitoring the engine's behavior with intense focus. Mike pressed the accelerator, and the engine climbed smoothly through the rev range. As it approached the critical 4,000 RPM mark, where the vibration had always occurred, everyone held their breath. The engine passed through 4,000 RPM without the slightest irregularity. "Again," Sarah said. "Hold it at 4,200 RPM for 30 seconds. The engine maintained perfect smoothness at the exact frequency where the problem had manifested, proving that Sarah's diagnosis and solution were flawless. A cheer erupted from the gathered mechanics, but Sarah remained focused. "We're not finished yet. The real test comes when Wellington drives it himself." At that moment, the sound of an expensive engine pulling into the parking lot silenced the celebration. Through the shop windows, they could see a luxury sedan that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Marcus Wellington had arrived. Marcus Wellington stepped out of his luxury sedan with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His presence filled the parking lot like a gravitational field, drawing nervous glances from the mechanics who had gathered near the shop windows. Even from a distance, everything about him radiated wealth and influence, from his perfectly tailored suit to the confident way he surveyed the building that housed Davidson's Auto Repair. Frank's hands trembled as he straightened his shirt and attempted to compose himself. 30 years of running this shop, and he'd never felt pressure like this. Wellington wasn't just another customer. He was the kind of person whose satisfaction could elevate a business to legendary status, while his displeasure could destroy reputations with surgical precision. "Remember," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced high-stakes situations countless times. "Confidence in your work speaks louder than nervous explanations. The car is fixed. Let the results prove themselves." Mike wiped his hands on a shop towel, still amazed by what they'd accomplished in such a short time frame. "I've been doing this for 3 decades, and I've never seen anything like what we just pulled off." The shop door opened with a soft chime, and Marcus Wellington entered with measured steps. He was younger than Frank had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. This wasn't someone who had inherited wealth and influence. This was someone who had earned both through intelligence and determination. "Mr. Davidson," Wellington's voice carried the refined accent of expensive education, but underneath lay steel that suggested he hadn't reached his position through privilege alone. "I trust you have good news regarding my vehicle." Frank stepped forward, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Wellington, I'm pleased to report that we've identified and resolved the issue with your car." Wellington's gaze swept across the shop, taking in the organized chaos of tools and equipment, before settling on Sarah. His expression shifted slightly, curiosity replacing the neutral politeness he'd shown Frank. "And you are?" he asked Sarah directly, clearly recognizing that she wasn't typical of automotive repair shops in this area. "Sarah Mitchell," she replied, meeting his gaze with professional confidence. "I was brought in to consult on your vehicle's specific technical challenges." Something flickered in Wellington's eyes. Recognition or interest that suggested Sarah's response had triggered a memory or connection. "Mitchell? That name sounds familiar. Have we met in professional circles?" Sarah paused, realizing that her background might create unexpected complications. "It's possible. I previously worked in motorsports engineering before transitioning to automotive repair." "Motorsports?" Wellington repeated slowly, his tone sharpening with genuine interest. "Which teams?" The conversation was veering into territory that made Frank nervous. He'd hired Sarah to fix a car, not to network with his most important customer. But Sarah's calm demeanor suggested she could handle whatever direction this interaction might take. "Silverstone Racing Development," Sarah answered honestly. "I specialized in suspension engineering and trackside technical support." The effect of that revelation on Wellington was immediate and dramatic. His professional reserve cracked, replaced by excitement that he couldn't quite suppress. "You worked for Silverstone? The same team that revolutionized active suspension systems in the International Racing Championship?" "I helped develop those systems," Sarah confirmed, her professional pride evident despite her modest tone. Wellington turned to Frank with an expression that bordered on disbelief. "Mr. Davidson, do you understand who you have working in your shop? Sarah Mitchell's suspension innovations are studied in engineering programs at major universities." Frank felt his world tilting once again. Not only had he humiliated someone far more qualified than anyone in his organization, but he'd done so in front of someone who apparently knew Sarah's reputation in professional circles. Perhaps, Wellington continued, his attention returning to Sarah, you could explain what was wrong with my car. I've had it to 3 different specialists, and none could identify the source of the vibration. Sarah moved toward Wellington's vehicle with professional confidence. Your car has been expertly modified for track performance, but the suspension upgrades created harmonic resonance at specific RPM ranges. The vibration you experienced wasn't mechanical failure, it was physics. She opened the hood and pointed to the areas where she'd installed the custom dampening components. The solution required manufacturing precision components that absorb the problematic frequencies while preserving the performance benefits of your modifications. Wellington leaned in, studying the new components with obvious expertise. These are custom fabricated, he observed. The precision and finish quality are exceptional. You manufactured these here? We have excellent fabrication equipment, Sarah replied, diplomatically crediting the shop while acknowledging her own contribution. May I test drive the vehicle? Wellington asked, though his tone suggested this was more formality than request. Frank nodded eagerly, producing the keys with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Of course, Mr. Wellington. We're confident you'll find the problem completely resolved. Wellington slid behind the wheel with practiced ease, immediately adjusting mirrors and seat position with the efficiency of someone accustomed to high-performance vehicles. The engine started with smooth precision, its sound filling the shop with mechanical harmony. He drove slowly out of the bay and onto the street, while everyone inside held their collective breath. Through the windows, they could see him accelerating progressively, testing the car through various RPM ranges with systematic thoroughness. Minutes passed like hours. Frank paced nervously while Sarah remained calm, confident in her technical solution. Mike and Tommy exchanged glances, both understanding that the next few minutes would determine not just the success of this repair, but potentially the entire future direction of the shop. The sound of Wellington's return grew louder as he approached the building. But instead of the measured pace of his departure, the engine notes suggested spirited acceleration, the kind of testing that would reveal any remaining problems immediately. He pulled into the bay with a smile that transformed his entire demeanor. Exceptional work, he announced, stepping out of the car with obvious satisfaction. The vibration is completely eliminated, and the performance characteristics are exactly as intended. The relief in the shop was palpable, but Wellington wasn't finished. Sarah, he continued, his tone becoming businesslike, I have a proposition for you. I'm involved with several automotive ventures that could benefit from your expertise. Are you available for consulting work? Frank felt a moment of panic. Having finally recognized Sarah's value, the thought of losing her to Wellington's obviously superior resources was terrifying. Actually, Sarah replied, glancing at Frank with a slight smile, I've just accepted a position here at Davidson's Auto Repair, but I'd be happy to discuss how we might collaborate on projects that require specialized engineering support. Wellington's eyebrows rose in surprise, but his expression quickly shifted to approval. Brilliant. Frank, you've just made the smartest business decision of your career. He turned back to Sarah with obvious respect. I'll be in touch about some projects that could benefit from your expertise. In the meantime, you've earned yourself quite a reputation. As Wellington prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Frank, you should know that word travels quickly in automotive circles. By tomorrow, everyone will know that Davidson's Auto Repair has acquired someone with championship-level expertise. The door closed behind him, leaving the shop in stunned silence as everyone processed what had just occurred. The silence that followed Marcus Wellington's departure was unlike anything the shop had ever experienced. 20 mechanics stood frozen in place, processing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Frank Davidson, who had built his reputation on being the smartest person in any automotive discussion, now understood that he had spent the morning humiliating someone whose expertise dwarfed his own understanding. Sarah remained by Wellington's car, methodically organizing the tools she had used during the repair. Her movements were calm and purposeful, but Mike Torres recognized the subtle signs of someone managing intense emotions. He had seen similar composure in master craftsmen who had just completed work that would define their careers. Sarah, Frank's voice broke the silence, carrying a tremor that revealed his internal struggle. I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what happened today. Sarah looked up from her work, studying Frank's face with the analytical precision she applied to mechanical problems. She could see genuine remorse competing with wounded pride, creating a conflict that would determine how this situation resolved. "Mr. Davidson," she replied carefully, "apologies are meaningless without understanding why they're necessary." The response caught Frank off guard. He had expected either gracious acceptance or righteous anger, not a challenge to examine his own behavior more deeply. "You're right," he admitted, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "I humiliated you because I made assumptions based on nothing except my own prejudices. I saw a woman asking for a job and decided you couldn't possibly have the skills to work here." Tommy Morrison shifted uncomfortably, recognizing his own participation in the morning's events. "Sarah, we all owe you apologies. The way we acted when you first arrived was exactly what I expected," Sarah finished quietly. "I've walked into dozens of shops where my qualifications were dismissed before anyone bothered to evaluate my actual abilities." Mike stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "That raises a question that's been bothering me. If you have championship-level expertise, why were you looking for work at places like this?" Sarah's pause revealed the complexity of her answer. "Because the automotive industry, especially at elite levels, operates on networks and relationships that don't always reward pure technical competence. When circumstances force you out of those networks, starting over means proving yourself again from the bottom." The explanation carried implications that made several mechanics uncomfortable. They were beginning to understand that Sarah's situation reflected systemic problems within their industry that extended far beyond individual prejudices. "What kind of circumstances?" Frank asked, though he suspected the answer would be difficult to hear. "The kind where technical excellence isn't enough to protect you when politics and personalities clash," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Racing is a high-pressure environment where success creates enemies as often as allies." Frank felt a growing realization that his shop had become Sarah's second chance, though she had been forced to earn it through public humiliation rather than professional recognition. "Sarah," he said slowly, "Wellington mentioned that word would spread about your presence here. What kind of impact are we talking about?" Sarah's expression shifted as she considered the implications. "Marcus Wellington moves in circles where automotive expertise is valued and discussed. If he's genuinely impressed with our work, it could transform the type of customers who seek services here." "How so?" Mike asked, clearly intrigued by possibilities he hadn't previously considered. "Performance car owners represent a specialized market," Sarah explained, warming to a subject where her expertise was unquestionable. "They're willing to pay premium prices for service from people who understand their vehicles at a technical level that goes beyond basic maintenance." Tommy's eyes widened as he processed the financial implications. "Are we talking about significant increases in revenue? We're talking about the difference between changing oil for daily drivers and preparing vehicles for track events," Sarah replied. "The profit margins are completely different because the expertise required is exponentially higher." Frank felt his business instincts awakening as he recognized an opportunity that could revolutionize his operation. What would it take to position ourselves for that market? Investment in advanced diagnostic equipment, specialized tools, and most importantly, training for your existing staff, Sarah answered. "The techniques I use today represent baseline knowledge for high-performance automotive work. The prospect of learning directly from someone with championship-level experience sparked excitement among the mechanics who had witnessed Sarah's capabilities firsthand. "Would you be willing to teach us?" Mike asked, speaking for the entire team. Sarah studied the faces surrounding her, seeing genuine hunger for knowledge that transcended the morning's uncomfortable beginning. "Learning this material requires dedication that goes beyond normal shop hours. It means studying engineering principles that most mechanics never encounter." "We're interested," Tommy said immediately, surprising himself with his enthusiasm. "After seeing what you accomplished today, I want to understand how to think about automotive problems the way you do." Frank recognized that Sarah was offering his shop transformation opportunities that extended far beyond resolving one customer's technical problem. "Sarah, I want to make you a formal offer. Not just employment, but partnership in developing this shop into something unprecedented in this region." The offer hung in the air like a bridge between Sarah's past accomplishments and potential future success. She had spent months facing rejection and skepticism, and now found herself with opportunities that could restore her professional standing. Partnership implies shared decision-making and profit participation, Sarah replied, her tone becoming businesslike. Are you prepared for the operational changes that would be necessary to support high-performance automotive services? Frank felt momentarily overwhelmed by the complexity of what Sarah was proposing, but Wellington's words echoed in his mind. This might be the smartest business decision of his career. What kind of changes? He asked. Different customer service standards, upgraded facility requirements, revised pricing structures that reflect the true value of specialized expertise, Sarah enumerated. Most importantly, cultural changes that ensure every customer receives service based on their vehicle's needs, rather than assumptions about their background. The reference to cultural change carried obvious implications about the morning's events. Frank understood that transformation would require examining and abandoning attitudes that had seemed normal until today. Sarah, Mike interjected, could this shop actually become competitive with high-end performance facilities in major cities? With proper investment and training, there's no technical reason why location should limit capabilities, Sarah replied confidently. Some of the most innovative automotive work happens in unexpected places when talented people have access to appropriate resources. Frank made a decision that surprised even himself. Sarah, I'm prepared to offer you full partnership in this business, with equal decision-making authority and profit sharing. But I have one condition. Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious about what Frank might consider important enough to attach conditions to such a generous offer. I want you to help me understand where my thinking has been wrong, Frank continued. Not just about gender in the workplace, but about how I evaluate talent, how I treat people, and how I've been limiting this business through my own narrow perspectives. The request revealed a level of self-awareness that impressed Sarah more than financial offers could have. Frank was asking for something more valuable than technical training. He was asking for help becoming a better leader and person. That's not a condition, Sarah replied with the first genuine smile she had shown since entering the shop. That's the foundation for building something extraordinary together. As handshakes and congratulations filled the workshop, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope that her expertise would finally be valued in an environment where she could build rather than merely survive. The transformation of Davidson's auto repair had begun, but none of them yet understood how dramatically their lives were about to change. 1 year later, the building that once housed Davidson's auto repair had been transformed into something that defied every expectation the automotive community had held about small-town shops. The sign outside now read, Davidson Mitchell Performance Engineering, and the waiting list for their services stretched 3 months into the future. Sarah stood in the main bay, watching as Mike Torres guided a young apprentice through the intricacies of suspension tuning on a vehicle that would compete in national racing circuits the following weekend. The student was Maria Santos, a recent engineering graduate who had applied specifically because she'd heard about the shop's revolutionary approach to technical education and workplace culture. Remember, Mike instructed with patience that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. The mathematics tell you what should work, but the vehicle tells you what actually does work. Listen to both. The transformation in Mike had been profound. Under Sarah's mentorship, he had evolved from a competent local mechanic into someone capable of preparing vehicles for professional competition. More importantly, he had become a teacher who understood that knowledge sharing created strength rather than vulnerability. Frank emerged from the office that now served as a design center, carrying blueprints for a custom suspension system that had attracted attention from racing teams across the country. His entire demeanor had changed. The arrogance and defensiveness replaced by confidence that came from leading an organization built on excellence rather than ego. Sarah, the Patterson racing team just confirmed their contract for next season, he announced, his voice carrying excitement that had become characteristic since their transformation began. They want us to develop the complete suspension package for their new chassis design. The Patterson contract represented validation that exceeded anything Frank had dreamed possible when he first inherited the shop. They were now competing directly with engineering firms in major metropolitan areas, winning contracts based purely on technical innovation and results. More importantly, Frank continued, they specifically requested that Maria lead the project design phase. Word is spreading about the talent we're developing here. Sarah smiled, watching Maria work with focused intensity that reminded her of her own early days in racing. Creating opportunities for the next generation had become one of the most rewarding aspects of their partnership. Tommy Morrison approached from the fabrication area, now serving as head of custom manufacturing. His expertise had expanded exponentially under Sarah's guidance, and he regularly produced components with precision that rivaled aerospace standards. "The Williams components are ready for final inspection," he reported. "I've never been more proud of work that came out of our shop." The Williams project involved developing lightweight racing components for a team that had previously sourced all their parts from European suppliers. Winning that contract had required proving that American manufacturing could meet the most demanding international standards. "Tommy, do you remember what you said when I first walked in here?" Sarah asked with gentle amusement. Tommy's face reddened slightly, but he smiled. "I believe my exact words were something about you confusing this place with a beauty salon. Not my finest moment, but an important learning moment," Sarah replied. "For all of us." The cultural transformation had been as significant as the technical evolution. The shop had become a place where ideas were evaluated based on merit rather than source, where knowledge was shared freely, and where every person's contribution was valued regardless of their background. Frank's phone rang, and he answered with the professional confidence that had replaced his earlier desperation to please important customers. "Davidson Mitchell Performance Engineering, this is Frank." The conversation that followed made his eyes widen progressively. When he hung up, his expression carried a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "That was Marcus Wellington," he announced to the gathered team. "He's been asked to recommend American engineering firms for a new international racing series. He's proposing us as the primary suspension development partner." The implications were staggering. International racing represented the pinnacle of automotive engineering, where innovations developed for competition eventually influenced every vehicle on the road. "Sarah," Frank continued, "they want you to present our technical capabilities to the series organizers next month. If we win this contract, we'll be designing suspension systems for cars that race on every continent." Sarah felt a moment of reflection about the journey that had brought her to this point. A year earlier, she had walked into this shop desperate for any opportunity to prove her worth. Now she was being offered chances to work at the highest levels of her profession, while building something that would create opportunities for others facing similar challenges. "There's something else," Frank added, his voice becoming more personal. "Wellington mentioned that Silverstone Racing has been asking about you. They want to discuss bringing you back as a consulting engineer for their new development program." The offer represented complete vindication, recognition from her former employer that they had made a mistake in letting her go. But Sarah's response surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm honored by their interest," she said thoughtfully, "but I think we're building something more important here. Silverstone will always be about winning races, which is valuable. But this place has become about changing lives and creating opportunities that didn't exist before." Maria looked up from her work with obvious relief. The thought of losing Sarah's mentorship before her own career had fully developed had been terrifying. "Besides," Sarah continued with a smile that carried deep satisfaction, "I've discovered that teaching others to achieve excellence is more rewarding than individual accomplishment ever was." Frank felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized how completely his understanding of success had been transformed. Building an organization that elevated everyone involved had proven more fulfilling than any personal achievement he had previously pursued. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I need you to know something. The morning you walked in here was the worst and best day of my professional life. Worst because of how I behaved. Best because it forced me to confront who I really was and who I wanted to become." Sarah nodded, understanding the courage required for such honest self-reflection. "Frank, the person who humiliated me that morning couldn't have built what we have now. Sometimes our biggest mistakes become the foundation for our greatest growth." Mike approached, carrying a framed photograph that had arrived that morning. A picture of a racing car carrying their suspension innovations crossing the finish line at a major international circuit. The driver was holding a trophy, while mechanics wearing Davidson Mitchell uniforms celebrated in the background. "I think this belongs in our main display," he said, but then paused thoughtfully. "Actually, I think it belongs next to the picture of Sarah's first day here." People should understand that great achievements often begin with moments that test our character. As the team prepared to close the shop for the day, Sarah reflected on the profound changes that had transformed not just a business, but the lives of everyone involved. Frank had evolved from an insecure leader who relied on prejudice to maintain authority into someone who understood that true strength came from empowering others. Mike had grown from a competent mechanic into a master teacher. Tommy had discovered capabilities he never knew he possessed. Maria was developing expertise that would carry her to the highest levels of her profession. But perhaps most significantly, they had created a model that other organizations were beginning to study and replicate. The combination of technical excellence with inclusive culture was proving that diversity of perspective enhanced rather than compromised performance. As Sarah turned off the lights in the main bay, she smiled at the realization that her greatest achievement wasn't any individual technical innovation, but the creation of an environment where the next generation could achieve even greater things. The engine that had roared to life that memorable morning had indeed changed everything. Not through mechanical perfection, but by proving that talent, when properly recognized and nurtured, could transform entire industries. Sometimes the most important victories aren't won through individual brilliance, but through the courage to see potential where others see only difference, and the wisdom to understand that our greatest strength lies not in what we can accomplish alone, but in what we can achieve when we empower others to exceed even their own expectations.